So it's an honor to come back to Pocket Gamer. So this is my third presentation at Pocket Gamer, and I cover basically all the West Coast. First time in Vancouver, second time in SF, and I'm glad to be in Seattle today. And so a lot's changed in esports since I got into it in early 2016. And right now, obviously, it's a very exciting time for esports. Great presentations and great talks from Chopper and Chris. And aside from seeing the likes of Riot and Blizzard grow their esports business, there's also a lot of new businesses that are popping up. And each year, there's always new things. And if you don't follow esports, every other week you're seeing. Oops, sorry. I guess did you click on the slide? Yeah, so every other week you're seeing new businesses, new news, new opportunities, new games that are popping up, and so from an outsider's perspective, oftentimes I get asked, okay, so what's happening in esports? Where are the opportunities? And right now it's a very hot time for esports. Obviously, we're getting to the point now we're getting mainstream media coverage. We're getting non-endemic investors that are really into this hype that's building up for esports. People see Overwatch on ESPN and are wondering, okay, is this the next big thing? So the talk that I want to talk about today is, with all these opportunities, if I was to start a new business or to acquire a business in esports, where would I start looking? Well, where are the opportunities? And let's be realistic here. We all don't have a couple $100 million to start the next League of Legends. So we're talking about realistic business opportunities and what are some of the ways in which we can go about to identify some of these opportunities. So I'm not sure how familiar the audience here today is with esports. So this is the challenge I always have, right? Either someone is learning about esports from scratch and you can talk about how big the market is. No, I'm going to go straight into talking about the opportunities, and I'm going to reference a lot of things that you guys can Google and find online as well. So if I go a little bit too quickly and skip through a couple slides, please I apologize in advance. So to start with, if I was to enter esports, from day one, I have to understand the landscape. I have to know exactly what kind of companies are in esports and basically have a good overview of the ecosystem. So you can find this online. I've referenced some of the third-party slides that I put up here. So this is done by Convoy Ventures. So and keep in mind that this is an overview based on how they interpret esports. Just hearing the talk from Chopper, talking about some of the opportunities and some of the things that are missing, such as advertising companies specific to esports. You'll find that they don't really belong in any category here. So just keep in mind this is really just a high-level overview, and how I would interpret looking at this kind of overview map is thinking about where do I come in? What are some of the underserved opportunities for one, and what are my competencies within this landscape? So sticking with the macro, one of the other things I like to look at is really trying to think about what are some of the upcoming opportunities, right? And what can I do to what I call ride the wave? And so two examples I would cite here is on the streaming side of the business. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with two businesses that recently got listed, Huya and Douyu. So they're basically the Twitch of China. And honestly, they have Twitch to thank for their business because years ago they were struggling with funding. Obviously, back then live streaming wasn't making as much money as it is now. So what happened was Twitch got bought out by Amazon for $1 billion. So that made it very easy for them to have that story to tell that, hey, look, Twitch has just been valued at $1 billion. I think for the China market, we can be valued at at a percentage of that, right? And so that gave them the funding to continue on their operation, and now both companies are listed. And you look at esports teams as well. For the longest time, they were having a lot of problems justifying the value, but esports caught on. TSM raised 25 mil, Cloud9 raised 50 mil, and so all these other tier 1 and tier 2 teams have a much easier time to raise money for themselves, because all they need to do is point the other direction and say, hey, look, this guy is getting us this much money. So, as a business, I want to be able to identify with where's the next wave. Where's that? If I'm not going to be the leader of that wave, how can I catch that wave? And again, just sharing something that's very on macro, and I'm going to share these very objectively here. These aren't my bullet points. This is actually taken from a white paper from esports research in Newzoo and esports conference called Esports Bar. So they, in this white paper, identified 5 trends to watch in 2019. So I remember that my previous 2 presentations I gave my own predictions of where esports is going, and I can tell you that my predictions have been off, so I'm not going to give my predictions. These are the predictions from Newzoo and Esports Bar. So, just kind of quickly going through them, they talk about a trend from online to offline. So I personally believe in this, and the platform that I'm building out for PiiK actually concentrates on this opportunity for, of growing that presence offline. They talk about opportunity with esports and traditional esports adopting each other's strategies. They talk about influencers being more involved outside of esports and becoming broadcasters even for traditional sports. Changing competition into entertainment, new esports formats being on the rise, and the battle for branding and advertising. So, these are some of the opportunities that they pointed out. But again, these are kind of very on the surface, and how do you interpret this? So, jumping into kind of my the juicy part of the presentation is, personally, I went through this experience. When I founded PiiK, and basically I went to the drawing board and I sat down and discussed with the team, what are some of the opportunities that we can tackle in esports. So, these are some of the ways in which I approached identifying the business opportunity that I wanted to tackle. And this, applies across all sectors, and even applies outside of esports. So. I hope that as you guys look at the points that I'll be making, you guys can kind of switch on your brains and think about, okay, what are some of the things that I can take away from these bullet points as well. So the first opportunity that I want to talk about is just basically thinking about X, but for esports, and this is a very easy way to approach, bringing about a new business opportunity. So some of the examples I've cited here, ESP, esports pool, basically is fantasy betting for esports. You have Gamer Sensei taking the model for one-on-one training, but for esports, and Panascore, which is a company that it concentrates on providing data and statistics for esports tournaments. Basically, what you want to think about is what are some of the technologies, platforms, and services that have worked well in other industries that can be applied for esports. So the pros for this is it's a very easy concept to explain, right? You go to an investor, you go to management or whatnot, and tell them that I want to build X for esports, and there's potential to leverage off existing technologies that you might already have in building this new product. The cons I've listed here, the business model is often simplified, and are you trying to fit a square peg into a round hole? Maybe whatever you want to build for esports, there's really just no market and no need for it. The second opportunity I want to talk about is filling the holes in the ecosystem. And so, as I was watching Chris's presentation, I think GenVid fits here. The slide that Chris had about filling that hole is exactly the point that I want to make here. Identify current and upcoming needs in the ecosystem and to adopt a new solution to fill that need. So examples I've cited here, ESP gaming, you'll be hearing from David a little bit later in the panel. You have your great games and you have viewers, but the esports viewing experience for the longest time have been very subpar. If you go back to YouTube and watch esports tournaments from 5, 6, 7 years ago, it looks like it's heavily dated. The production value is meh, and so I think companies like ESP have stepped up the game, and they said that we're great at making good high-level production. We've done the World Series of Poker. Let's take that experience and bring it to esports. And with loaded.gg, so nowadays we all hear about how much influencers like Ninja are making. So mega bucks are being spent on esports, and how influencers literally overnight start to command so much money. It's really through the help of agencies, because agencies have helped them communicate the value that they bring. They have proper management that brings the opportunities and deals to them. And so prior to professional agencies like Loaded.gg, there was that hole to fill in which if I was a brand, if I was a game, how do I communicate with these influencers to get the best value? So again, finding that business to fill that hole and meet that need. But there are some cons, of course, with taking this approach. You do need to require a deep understanding of the esports ecosystem, right? You can't just go in and say that I'm going to fill a hole, again, if there is no need for that. The third opportunity I'd like to talk about is the introduction of new technologies. So I would say this is the riskier one, but it's also the more sexy one, right? Applying layers of emerging technologies into esports. So examples here, blockchain. Right now, I'm actually really interested to hear about blockchain gaming. Obviously, that's year after year has been evolving so quickly. But blockchain esports, there's a lot of platforms that are making use of blockchain for gambling platforms, for payouts, for skins, with Dream Team being one of them, and other emerging technologies like AR, VR. So Hado is a Japanese AR esports league that you've probably seen the videos on YouTube. It looks really amazing, really cool. I've actually not looked too much into this, but again, applying that new layer of technology to create a new demand. But the con of this, obviously, it's high risk being that first mover to the market, and usually because it's a new technology, it requires quite a bit of time and investment. Fourth opportunity I'd like to talk about is basically creating a new demand. So, once you're able to understand the audience and understand the need of the market, create a unique product or service into the ecosystem that has potential for high adoption. So, when I first gave this talk in 2016, there was no such thing as Battle Royale. There was H1Z1, yes, there was somewhat of a genre that was up and coming, but that's how fast esports has grown. There's literally a new gaming genre that has swept the nation, gotten the attention of parents and kids alike. And yeah, I mean, if you really have that vision to create something new, build a new gaming genre and make it into esports. And peripherals, right? This is something that before gaming, streaming, and esports became a big thing, you wouldn't think about having gaming chairs. You wouldn't think about these kind of cool peripherals that Razer would come up with. But because they had that vision of, okay, we want to build a brand for gamers, they took something like headsets, keyboards, something that's been around for 30, 40 years and made it into something that seemed new and that targeted a new segment of gamers. And the final opportunity I want to talk about is, and this is a very simple one, improving on existing products. Identifying successful products and services in the market that has areas for significant improvement and offer a competitive product with that improvement. So the interesting thing is, as I was looking for examples of this, there actually weren't too many on esports. The one example I cite here, again, going to the Battle Royale genre. So H1Z1 was kind of really the first to make Battle Royale into a thing, but there were a lot of problems with it. With the main thing being the game balancing. The balancing just seemed off. It wasn't meant to be esports ready. So, Player Unknown, who was the guy behind the Battle Royale for H1Z1, basically took on that problem and made a new game, which is PUBG. PUBG is great. It's still doing well, but over time, people start complaining about a lot of things with PUBG as well. And main thing being the game pace. A lot of players would spend all the time looking for weapons, camping, and you make all that effort, and all of a sudden you get headshot and you die, right? So, and Apex Legends came along, and I think the EA, well, it is the EA team, but specifically the Apex Legends team looked at the Battle Royale genre and thought about, okay, how can I make this game more fun, more fast-paced, and make it more rewarding for players, so that it doesn't feel like I want to strangle myself every time I get shot, right? So the cons with this approach is that the product improvement has to be quite significant for people to adopt this new product. I come from the mobile gaming space before jumping into esports, and oftentimes people look at a successful game like Clash Royale and say that, oh, I can make Clash Royale but better. But how many games have actually come along and been better than Clash Royale? A lot of times, a lot of people tend to simplify the process of trying to make a product better. And sometimes people also forget about that. Existing products, especially nowadays in gaming, it's very easy for the existing players to play catch-up as well. So perfect example being Epic and Fortnite. The game has continued to evolve, and Epic has spent a lot of effort into its live ops to update its content and to make sure that the game feels fresh. So you can spend all this time making a competing product like Apex has, but when the existing product has the power and has the ability to understand its audience like Epic does, it's sometimes very difficult for you to come in and offer what you would call a better product. And on this note, actually, I want to share a case study which has nothing to do with esports, but it's a good example of, as an entrepreneur and as someone that's trying to build a new product, what are some of the ways and some of the things I look for to try to execute this product and try to execute this company to give it the best chance to succeed. So the company that I've looked at is actually Zoom. So Zoom is not the sexiest company. It's recently listed. It's a video conference company, and I'm sure you guys have come across it, making conference calls and whatnot. And so they recently got listed on I think NASDAQ, on New York Stock Exchange. So there was a very good article written by Forbes talking about how Zoom entered a very non-sexy industry that everyone thought was mature, and it was very difficult for a new company to just kind of go in there and try to compete in. But when you break it down and try to understand why they succeeded, actually a lot of these things are applicable to anyone that's trying to start a new company, and especially I feel like in esports as well. So with Zoom, they've identified a pain point, and so for video conferencing, basically the solutions were dated, right? And I'm sure that there's a lot of technology in esports where people just accept it as what it is right now, but it's actually dated. Identified a new technology. So again, going back to one of the opportunities I talked about earlier, right? As technologies evolve, there's always going to be new opportunities that pop up. So for Zoom, it was video conferencing on cloud. They're industry experts, so this is something that I always look for in a founding team, whether it's me building a team from scratch or I'm investing in a team. I want these guys to know the industry inside out. These aren't guys that are coming from doing crypto and all of a sudden saying that, oh, I want to go into esports, right? And nothing against crypto guys, but yeah, I mean, you hear a guy like Chopper talk about his experience in esports, and this guy knows esports inside out. Frugality, so I think this is something that esports also lacks. A lot of people in esports tend to be young guys, so once they raise around, they go crazy and they go partying. I've been part of a lot of startups that have that kind of culture as well. But yeah, Zoom practiced frugality. Their founder rarely traveled. He didn't take expensive trips across the world. He concentrated on building a good product with his team, lining up partnerships, focus on product, and building features that are meant for the user. And I think this is something that I've seen a lot of esports startups talking about how they are going to build this awesome feature. And the question I always ask myself is, what is this going to do for the user? And again, going back to Genvid being a good example, they have the viewer in mind, which is how is our product going to make the viewing experience significantly better and more engaging for the viewer. And so, just taking a quote from Zoom, they didn't reinvent the wheel, and they made it just a lot less painful to turn. And so, where I see esports going is, I would say the closest equivalent to this story would probably be Discord. They're not a specifically built for esports company, but obviously they have a big presence in esports and gaming. And I recently just saw on LinkedIn from one of the senior guys there that they've hit their 4th-year anniversary, and they have now 250 million registered users. And so I think a lot of the bullet points that are listed here would probably apply to them as well. And so This presentation was meant to be a kind of very high-level objective overview. It wasn't meant to, sell you guys on where certain direction or certain business ideas in esports might take off over others. But I hope this kind of gets everyone thinking about what are some of the potential opportunities, and as technology evolves, as the esports scene evolves, as more and more money and more resources get poured in, and most importantly, as the audience for esports grows, I definitely hope that there's going to be more business opportunities and more success stories coming out for esports.
Thank you very much.